The conference room aboard Nexus 7 station gleamed with cold blue light. Captain Deho sat at the curved table, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Around him, representatives from across the Galactic Concordat watched holographic displays with perfect stillness. No one fidgeted. No one sighed. No one showed any sign of the stress that Deho felt building in his chest. He had learned to hide it well over the past 2 years. Earth's admission into the Concordat had been conditional. Humans were tolerated, not welcomed. They were the youngest species, the most primitive, still controlled by what the others called chemical impulses. Deho had attended hundreds of these meetings, always careful to keep his face blank, his voice steady, his emotions buried deep. The Velthari representative spoke first. Her body was made of living crystal that caught the light and split it into rainbow patterns. Her voice sounded like wind chimes. The distress signal from Kelros 4 has been analyzed. The data is clear. Holographic numbers filled the air. Deho read them quickly. A mining colony. 300 workers. Seismic activity had damaged the underground facilities. Oxygen systems failing. Structural collapse imminent. Time until total failure? Asked Commander Ixtal. The Orgath was more machine than organic being, his metal frame humming softly with each word. 47 hours, the Velthari replied. Distance from nearest rescue vessels? 32 hours at maximum speed. Deho felt hope rise in his chest. They could make it. It would be close, but possible. He leaned forward slightly, ready to volunteer Earth ships. Resource analysis? Ixtal continued. Another hologram appeared. This one showed fuel costs, ship availability, personnel requirements, and risk assessments. Deho watched the numbers cascade down like a waterfall of cold facts. The Velthari's crystals dimmed slightly. 3 rescue vessels would be required. Fuel expenditure would exceed monthly allocation by 17%. The nebula surrounding Kelros 4 presents navigation hazards. Probability of successful extraction is 34%. Probability of losing rescue ships is 41%. The room was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Deho counted them. The calculation is complete, Ixtal said. The cost exceeds acceptable parameters. The risk is too high. We must abandon the colony. Deho's heart stopped. He looked around the table, waiting for someone to object. No one did. The other representatives were already moving on to the next agenda item. 300 lives dismissed with mathematics. Wait, Deho said. His voice came out rougher than intended. Several representatives turned their attention to him. We're just going to leave them? There are 300 people down there. 317 to be precise, the Velthari corrected. However, the numbers are clear. A rescue attempt would likely result in additional casualties and unacceptable resource depletion. But we have a chance. 34% is not zero. Ixtal's optical sensors focused on Deho. 34% is insufficient. Standard protocol requires a minimum 60% probability of success for high-risk operations. This does not meet that threshold. Deho felt his hands tighten into fists under the table. He forced them to relax. They're people. They're alive. We can't just write them off because the numbers don't look good. This is emotional reasoning, another representative said. This one was Velthari, older and larger than the first. You are allowing chemical responses to override logical analysis. This is why your species required a probationary period before full Concordat membership. The word stung, but Deho pushed forward. I'm not being emotional. I'm saying that we have the capability to try. We have ships. We have pilots. We have a system, Ixtal interrupted. His voice remained perfectly level, but there was finality in it. The Concordat has maintained peace and order for 3,000 cycles precisely because we do not allow emotions to influence critical decisions. Emotion leads to irrationality. Irrationality leads to conflict. Conflict leads to chaos. This is why your species nearly destroyed itself before you reached the stars. Deho wanted to argue. He wanted to slam his fist on the table and demand they act. But he had seen what happened to humans who showed too much emotion in these meetings. They were dismissed, their opinions disregarded, their species' reputation damaged. He took a slow breath and tried a different approach. What if we could improve those odds? What if we sent our best pilots, used different routes through the nebula, improvised solutions? Improvisation introduces additional variables, the senior Velthari said. This increases risk rather than reducing it. The decision is final. The colony will be listed as lost. Compensation will be calculated for the families. Next item on the agenda. Just like that, it was over. The hologram shifted to show trade routes and resource allocations. The other representatives began discussing tariffs and shipping schedules. 317 people were dying, and no one cared because the math said it was acceptable. Deho sat through the rest of the meeting in silence. His mind was racing, but his face remained calm. He had learned that much, at least. When the session finally ended, he walked quickly to his private quarters on the station. The door sealed behind him, and only then did he let himself feel it. The anger, the frustration, the grief for people he had never met, but who were being abandoned to die alone in the dark. He activated his communication terminal and opened a secure channel. After a moment, Lieutenant G1's face appeared on the screen. She was aboard the Perseverance, Earth scout ship currently docked at the far end of the station. "Sir?" she said, reading his expression immediately. "What happened?" Deho told her everything. G1's face remained carefully neutral throughout, but he could see the tension in her jaw, the slight narrowing of her eyes. She felt it too, the wrongness of it. "What are we going to do?" she asked quietly. Deho looked at the star charts on his wall. Kelros 4 was marked there, a small moon in a dangerous sector. 47 hours. The clock was already ticking. "How many crew members do we have aboard the Perseverance right now?" G1's eyes widened slightly. 12. Full complement would be 20, but we're between assignments. "Sir, you're not thinking—" "I am," Deho said. "I want volunteers only. No one who has family they can't risk leaving behind. No one who isn't willing to throw away their career for this. Because that's what we're talking about. If we do this, the Concordat will probably exile us. Earth might disavow us to protect their own position. How long do I have to ask around?" 2 hours. "We need to leave in 3 if we're going to make it." G1 nodded slowly. Then a small smile crossed her face. "You know what they're going to say, right? That this is emotional, irrational, that we're proving them right about humans." "Maybe we are," Deho said, "but I'd rather be emotional and wrong than logical and evil. Get me those volunteers." The screen went dark. Deho sat in his quarters staring at the star charts. By every calculation, this was a mistake. The Concordat was right about the odds. They probably would fail. They might die trying. And even if they succeeded, they would lose everything they had worked for. But there were 317 people on that moon who were being abandoned because numbers on a screen said they weren't worth saving. Deho had joined the military to protect people, not to let them die because it was economically inefficient. His terminal chimed. A message from G1. Just 3 words. "We're all in." Deho stood and began gathering his gear. The Concordat said emotion was weakness. They said feelings led to bad decisions and chaos. Maybe they were right. But right now, Deho didn't care. Sometimes you had to be irrational. Sometimes you had to ignore the numbers and do what was right even if it was stupid. The Perseverance would launch in 3 hours, and Captain Deho would show the galaxy what human emotion could accomplish, even if it destroyed him in the process. The Perseverance left Nexus 7 station without permission. Deho sat in the captain's chair and watched the station shrink behind them. No alarms had sounded. No one tried to stop them. The Concordat didn't think they would actually do it. They thought it was just human emotion, a temporary chemical imbalance that would pass once logic reasserted itself. They were wrong. G1 stood at the navigation console, her fingers moving quickly across the holographic controls. "Course set for Kelros 4. At maximum speed, we'll arrive in 30 hours. That gives us 17 hours to get everyone out before the colony collapses." "Will we make it?" Deho asked. "The numbers say no," G1 replied. "But when have we ever trusted the numbers?" Around the bridge, 11 other crew members worked at their stations. Deho knew them all. Pilot Tai Young, who could fly through an asteroid field blindfolded. Engineer Hana, who could fix anything with spare parts and determination. Medical Officer Subin, who had volunteered first when she heard about the mission. Young scientist Minji, barely 23 years old, who said she joined Earth's space program to help people, not to watch them die. They were all volunteers. They all knew what they were risking, and none of them hesitated. "Captain," Tae Yang called from the pilot station. "We're approaching the Kelros Nebula. Scanners are showing heavy particle storms and electromagnetic interference. This is why the Concordat said the route was too dangerous. Daeho moved to stand behind Taeyang's chair. The view screen showed a massive cloud of gas and dust that glowed with strange colors. Lightning arced between particles, creating a light show that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so deadly. "Can we go around?" Daeho asked. "That would add 12 hours to our journey," Jiwon said. "We don't have 12 hours. Then we go through." Taeyang grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." The Perseverance entered the nebula and immediately everything went wrong. The ship shook as particle storms battered the hull. Sensors flickered and died. The main view screen filled with static. Computer systems started throwing error messages as electromagnetic interference scrambled their guidance systems. "I can't get a clear reading," Jiwon shouted over the noise. "Navigation is down. We're flying blind." "Switch to manual," Daeho ordered. Taeyang's hands moved to the physical controls. Going manual in a particle storm is suicide. The computer calculates thousands of variables per second. "I can't do that." "No," Daeho agreed. "But you can do something the computer can't. You can feel it. Trust your instincts." For a moment, Taeyang just stared at him. Then he nodded and gripped the controls. His eyes closed briefly, then opened with new focus. He wasn't looking at the scanners anymore. He was watching the patterns in the nebula, the way the gas moved, the rhythm of the lightning strikes. The ship began to dance. Taeyang flew like he was part of the ship, like the Perseverance was an extension of his own body. He didn't calculate angles or trajectories. He felt them. When a particle storm appeared ahead, he dove under it before the sensors could warn him. When lightning arced toward them, he rolled the ship in a direction that made no mathematical sense but somehow kept them safe. In the engine room, Hana was performing her own kind of magic. Warning lights covered her console like a Christmas tree. The ship was never designed to fly through a nebula like this. Systems were overloading. Power conduits were burning out. Everything the Concordat had calculated about this mission being impossible was turning out to be correct. But Hana wasn't from the Concordat. She was human, and humans were very good at making impossible things work. She rerouted power in ways that violated every safety protocol. She bypassed failing systems and connected others that were never meant to work together. When a critical coolant line burst, she sealed it with emergency foam and a prayer. When the shield started failing, she redistributed power from life support in empty sections to keep them running. "This shouldn't work," her assistant said, watching her work with wide eyes. "I know," Hana replied, her hands never stopping. "That's why it will." After 6 hours of flying through hell, the Perseverance emerged from the nebula. The ship was battered, smoking in places, and several systems were held together with improvised repairs that would make a Concordat engineer faint. But they had made it. They had done what the calculations said was impossible. "Kelros 4 dead ahead," Taeyang announced. He looked exhausted but triumphant. "Approaching orbit now." The moon appeared on the view screen. It was a gray, lifeless rock pockmarked with mining operations. As they got closer, they could see the damage. One entire section of the surface had collapsed. Dust and debris still hung in the thin atmosphere. "Scanning for life signs," Jiwon said. Her face went pale. "I'm reading 317 signals, but they're weak. The main habitat is completely destroyed. They're scattered across multiple tunnel systems, and those tunnels are collapsing." "How long do they have?" Daeho asked. "Some sections have hours. Others have minutes. And we have no way to get to all of them at once." Daeho made a decision. "We split up. Multiple rescue teams, multiple locations. We don't leave until we have everyone." "Captain, that's not efficient," Jiwon said. "We should prioritize the largest group, save as many as possible." "No," Daeho interrupted. "We save all of them. That's what we came here to do." They landed near the largest colony entrance and split into teams. Daeho led one group into the tunnels. Subin took another. Jiwon took a third. The tunnels were dark, filled with dust and shaking with regular tremors. Warning signs in multiple languages told them to evacuate immediately. Daeho's team found the first group of colonists 3 levels down. They were Veltari, their crystalline bodies dim with fear and exhaustion. When they saw humans coming to rescue them, they seemed confused. "You came," one of them said. But the council said rescue was illogical. "We're not very logical," Daeho replied. "Can you walk?" They could, barely. Daeho's team helped them toward the surface. Behind them, another tunnel collapsed with a sound like thunder. Subin's team found a group trapped behind a cave-in. They included humans, Velthari, and 3 Orgath. The Orgath could have calculated their chances of survival. They could have told Subin that rescue was unlikely, but when they saw her, covered in dust and bleeding from a cut on her forehead, they didn't mention statistics. They just helped her dig. It took hours. Subin's hands were raw and bleeding by the time they broke through. One of the trapped colonists was injured badly, his leg crushed by falling rock. By concordant protocols, he should have been left behind. He was slowing them down. He reduced their chances of escape. Subin didn't leave him. She gave him painkillers, splinted his leg with pieces of broken equipment, and then she and 2 others carried him. When he protested, said he was making it harder, she just smiled and said, "That's what we do. We carry each other." In another tunnel, Minji's team found a Veltari colonist who had completely shut down. Her species didn't experience fear the way humans did, but they could experience something like it. This Velthari had been trapped alone in the dark for 2 days, and her crystalline mind had fractured under the stress. Minji sat down next to her. The others wanted to keep moving, but Minji refused to leave. She held the Velthari's hand. Even though the crystal edges cut her palm, she talked to her softly. About Earth, about the sky, about anything that might bring her back. "I don't understand," the Velthari whispered. "Why would you stay?" "You're reducing your survival probability." "Because you're scared," Minji said simply, "and nobody should be scared alone." Slowly, the Velthari's crystals began to glow brighter. She stood up, leaning on Minji, and they walked out together. Team by team, group by group, they brought the colonists out. The Perseverance made 3 trips to orbit, ferrying people to safety. They were overcrowded, past maximum capacity, breathing recycled air that was getting thinner by the hour. But they kept going. The last group came out 15 minutes before the final collapse. Daeho watched from the ship as the entire tunnel system caved in, swallowing what remained of the colony. If they had waited even a little longer, if they had stopped to rest, if they had followed the logical advice to leave anyone behind, people would have died. But they didn't. All 317 colonists were aboard the Perseverance alive. Daeho looked around the crowded cargo bay. Humans and aliens sat together, sharing water and emergency rations. Some were crying, some were laughing, some just sat in shocked silence, but they were alive. "Captain," G1 said quietly, appearing at his side. "We did it." "Yeah," Daeho said. "Now we just have to face the consequences." The Perseverance turned toward Concordate space. Behind them, Kelros 4's moon continued its orbit, now marked as a disaster site. Ahead of them, the Council waited, and Daeho knew that saving everyone was just the beginning of the real battle. The Perseverance was met by Concordate security ships the moment they entered controlled space. Daeho had expected this. What he hadn't expected was the silence. No one congratulated them on the successful rescue. No one acknowledged that 317 people were alive because of them. They were simply escorted to Nexus 7 and placed under immediate detention. Daeho and his crew were separated and confined to quarters. Guards stood outside their doors, not that they had anywhere to run. Earth was weeks away, and even if they could escape, where would they go? They had violated Concordate law. They had disobeyed direct orders. They had let emotion override logic, and now they would pay for it. The tribunal was scheduled for 3 days later. It was held in the largest chamber on Nexus 7, with representatives from every major species in attendance. This wasn't just about one unauthorized rescue mission. This was about whether humanity deserved to remain in the Concordate at all. Daeho stood alone at the center of the chamber. His crew sat in a viewing section, flanked by guards. The rescued colonists sat in another section, their presence a reminder of what this was really about. Above them all, the council sat in elevated seats, looking down like judges from ancient history. Commander Ixtal spoke first. His mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. "Captain Daeho of Earth, you are charged with violation of Concordate Protocol 7, unauthorized use of military assets, violation of Protocol 12, disobeying direct council orders, and most seriously, violation of Protocol 1, allowing emotional reasoning to override logical decision-making. How do you plead?" Daeho took a breath. "Guilty of all charges." A murmur ran through the chamber. Ixtal's optical sensors brightened with what might have been surprise. "You do not contest the charges." "I can't," Daeho said. "I did everything you said. I took the ship without permission. I ignored your orders. And yes, I made decisions based on emotion rather than logic. I don't deny any of it." The senior Veltari representative leaned forward. Her name was Elder Vestara, and she had served the council for over a century. Then you understand the severity of your actions. By your own admission, you have proven exactly what we feared about your species. You are ruled by chemical impulses. You cannot be trusted with important decisions. Maybe, Deho said, but I'd like to present something to the council before you pass judgment. Not a defense exactly. More like context, Ixtal considered this. Proceed. Deho gestured to the viewing section where the rescued colonists sat. I'd like to call witnesses, people who were on Kelros 4, people whose lives your logic said weren't worth saving. There was a long pause. Then Ixtal nodded. This is irregular, but we will allow it. The first witness was a Veltari engineer named Kira. She approached the center of the chamber, her crystalline body catching the light. She had been one of the colonists trapped in the deepest tunnels, one of the first Deho's team had found. Tell the council what happened, Deho said gently. Kira's voice was soft but clear. I was trapped for 36 hours. My oxygen was depleting. I had calculated my probability of survival at 8%. I had accepted my fate. And then I heard footsteps. Human footsteps. I thought I was hallucinating. What did the humans do? Deho asked. They dug me out. It took 4 hours. The tunnel was collapsing around us. Every calculation said they should leave me. I told them to leave me. But the one called Subin, she looked at me and said, "We didn't come all this way to give up now." She stayed. They all stayed, and I'm alive because of it. Kira turned to face the council directly. For my entire life I have believed that emotion is weakness. That logic is the only path to truth. But when I was dying in the dark, logic offered me nothing but acceptance of death. It was emotion that saved me. It was these humans and their irrational hope. She returned to her seat. The council said nothing. Next came an Orgath mechanic named Torvin. He was young for his species, only 70 cycles old. He had been part of the group Subin's team found trapped behind the cave-in. I observed the humans closely during the rescue. Torvin said, I am trained in efficiency analysis. What they did made no logical sense. They wasted energy on unnecessary conversation. They stopped to comfort those who were afraid. Medical Officer Subin spent precious time treating injuries that were not life-threatening. And she refused to leave me behind even though my damaged leg reduced the group's movement speed by 43%. And you view this as positive? Elder Vestra asked. I view it as extraordinary, Torvin replied, because I calculated our odds of escape. With perfect efficiency, we had a 51% chance of survival. But we were not efficient. We were slow, we were burdened with the injured. We wasted time on emotional support. By all calculations, we should have died. But we did not. We escaped with a 100% survival rate. How is this possible? He paused, his mechanical systems humming as he processed his own question. I believe it is because the humans gave us something that cannot be calculated. They gave us motivation. They gave us the will to fight beyond our logical limits. When Subin carried me, she spoke constantly. Told me about her family, her home, her favorite foods. Meaningless information. But it made me want to survive. Not because the odds were good, but because she cared whether I lived or died. That emotion, that irrational care pushed all of us to achieve what logic said was impossible. More witnesses followed. A human colonist who talked about Minji sitting with the traumatized Velthari. A Velthari scientist who described Taeyang's impossible flying through the nebula. Each story painted the same picture. Humans doing illogical things that somehow produced logical results. Finally, Deho called his last witness. It was not a colonist. It was G1, his second in command. Lieutenant, Deho said, why did you volunteer for this mission? G1 stood straight, her hands clasped behind her back. Because it was the right thing to do. But you knew it violated protocols. You knew we might fail. You knew the consequences. Yes, so why risk everything? G1 was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because I looked at those numbers on the screen. 317 people. And I realized that the Concordat didn't see people. They saw statistics. They saw resource allocations. They saw acceptable losses. But humans, we see people. We see 317 individuals with families, with dreams, with lives that matter. And we decided that even a 34% chance was worth taking, because the alternative was abandoning them to die alone in the dark. She turned to face the council. You say emotion is our weakness, that we're primitive because we feel things. But I think you're the ones who are missing something. Logic can tell you the most efficient path, but it can't tell you the right path. Sometimes the right choice is the hard choice, the dangerous choice, the choice that makes no mathematical sense. Sometimes you have to be willing to fail, to risk everything because some things are more important than odds and statistics. Jiwon returned to her seat. The chamber was absolutely silent. Elder Vestara spoke. You make compelling arguments, but this tribunal is not about whether your actions had positive results. It is about whether emotional decision-making can be trusted within the concordate structure. You succeeded this time. But what about next time? What if your emotions lead to disaster instead of triumph? Daeho stepped forward. You're right. Emotions are unpredictable. They can lead to mistakes. They can make us act rashly, carelessly, even stupidly. I'm not arguing that emotions should replace logic. I'm arguing that they need to work together. He pointed at the colonists. Your logic told you to abandon these people because the numbers didn't work. But your logic was incomplete. It didn't account for human determination. It didn't account for creative problem-solving born from desperation. It didn't account for the fact that when you tell someone they matter, when you refuse to give up on them, they find strength they didn't know they had. Daeho took a breath. You built a society on pure logic, and it's given you peace, order, efficiency, but it's also made you cold. It's made you calculate the value of lives like they're resources to be managed. And I'm asking you to consider this. When your logic tells you to abandon the innocent and emotion tells you to save them, which one is truly flawed? The council deliberated for 3 hours. Daeho and his crew waited in the viewing section, not speaking, barely breathing. The rescued colonists waited with them. Some held hands. Some prayed to gods that logic said didn't exist. Finally, Ixtal spoke. We have reached a decision. This tribunal recognizes that Captain Daeho and his crew violated multiple concordate protocols. However, we also recognize that their actions resulted in the preservation of 317 lives. Lives that our own calculations deemed not worth saving. He paused, and for the first time, Daeho thought he heard something like uncertainty in the mechanical voice. This council is divided. Some believe that protocols must be absolute, that allowing emotional reasoning sets a dangerous precedent. Others have been affected by what they witnessed. For the first time in concordate history, we cannot reach unanimous consensus. Elder Vestara stood. Therefore, we propose a compromise. Captain Daeho and his crew will not be exiled. Humanity will remain in the concordate, but we will implement a new system, a trial program. Human advisors will be assigned to council operations to provide what you call emotional perspective. We will test whether this combination of logic and emotion can improve our decision-making. It wasn't a full victory, but it wasn't defeat either. Daeho felt something loosen in his chest. They had done more than save lives. They had started to change minds. The tribunal ended. As Daeho walked out with his crew, Kira approached him. The Velthari who had been trapped in the tunnels. Thank you, she said simply. You already thanked us, Daeho replied. Not for saving my life, Kira said. For teaching me that some things cannot be calculated. That sometimes the most illogical choice is the most right choice. She walked away, her crystals glowing brighter than before, and Daeho realized that they hadn't just saved 317 lives. They had planted a seed of something new in the concordate, something that logic alone could never create. Hope. The tribunal's decision created something unexpected. The rescued colonists returned to their home worlds, carrying with them stories of the humans who defied logic to save them. Those stories spread like fire through the concordate, jumping from species to species, world to world, and everywhere they went, they left questions in their wake. Kira returned to her home world, a crystalline planet where Velthari lived in perfect geometric cities. She tried to return to her old life, her old routines, but something had changed. In the tunnels, when Subin held her hand and refused to leave, Kira had felt something her species had no word for. It was warm and bright and completely illogical. She found herself thinking about it constantly, analyzing it, trying to understand it. Eventually, she went to the Hall of Logic, where the eldest Velthari contemplated mathematical truths. She found Grand Scholar Veskara meditating on a complex equation. I need to understand something, Kira said. When someone saves your life at risk to their own, when they care about your survival more than their own safety, what is that? Veskara's crystals pulsed thoughtfully. Resource allocation error. Survival instinct malfunction. No, Kira said firmly. It's something else. The humans call it caring. They call it compassion, and I want to learn how to feel it too. Veskara stared at her for a long moment. That is emotional thinking. We evolved beyond such things millennia ago. Did we? Kira asked. Or did we just forget how? She wasn't the only one asking questions. Torvin, the Orgath mechanic, had returned to his factory world. He tried to go back to his assembly line work, optimizing production efficiency like he had for decades. But he kept thinking about Subin carrying him through the collapsing tunnels, wasting time telling him stories about Earth, making him want to live. He began researching human psychology. The concordant databases had information, but it was all clinical, analytical. It described emotions as chemical reactions, nothing more. But Torvin had experienced something that felt like more. When Subin refused to leave him, when she smiled at him and told him terrible jokes to keep his spirits up, something in his mechanical mind had shifted. He started an experiment. Each morning, he would greet his co-workers, not with the standard efficiency report, but with a simple question. How are you today? The other Orgath found this confusing at first. How are you had no logical purpose. It was wasted communication, but slowly something changed. The workers started responding. They talked about their tasks, their concerns, their hopes for optimization improvements, and Torvin noticed that productivity increased. Not because of better algorithms, but because workers who felt heard, who felt like someone cared, worked harder and more creatively. On Nexus 7, Daeho watched these changes with cautious hope. His crew had been assigned as emotional advisors to various concordant departments. It was a strange position. They attended meetings and offered perspectives that made logical species uncomfortable. Minji was assigned to the medical research division. One day she sat in a meeting where scientists discussed treatment protocols. They were analyzing a disease that affected multiple species, and they had developed 2 potential treatments. Treatment A had a 90% success rate but was expensive. Treatment B had a 70% success rate but was cheaper. Clearly, we implement Treatment B across the board, one scientist said. The cost-benefit analysis is optimal. But people will die who wouldn't have died with Treatment A, Minji said quietly. 20% more, yes. But the resource savings will allow us to treat twice as many patients overall. The mathematics is clear. Minji looked around the table. Have any of you ever been sick? Really sick, scared you might die sick? Silence, I have, Minji continued. When I was 12, I had a disease that had a 70% survival rate. I remember lying in the hospital, knowing that 3 out of 10 people with my condition would die. And you know what I thought? I thought I don't want to be one of the 3. Not the statistics favor my survival. I was terrified. She leaned forward. Every person who gets this disease will feel that same fear. And if we choose the cheaper treatment, 20% more of them will die because we decided their lives weren't worth the extra cost. We're not talking about statistics. We're talking about people who are scared and who are trusting us to do everything we can to save them. The meeting went silent. Finally, the lead scientist said, "We will reconsider our recommendation." It was a small victory, but there were others. Hana was assigned to engineering and taught concordant engineers that sometimes the best solution wasn't the most elegant one. Sometimes you had to improvise, to trust your instincts, to try something that shouldn't work but somehow did. Taiyang worked with navigation, showing pilots that flying wasn't just about calculations. It was about feeling the ship, understanding its personality, pushing beyond what the computer said was possible. Slowly, emotion was spreading through the concordant. Not everywhere and not without resistance, but it was spreading. Then came the backlash. High Arbiter Velthas was a Velthari of the Old Order. He had served the Concordat for 2 centuries, had helped establish many of the protocols that governed their society. And he watched the spread of emotion with growing alarm. He called a meeting of like-minded individuals. They gathered in a secure chamber, representatives from species across the Concordat who believed that emotion was not evolution, but infection. "The humans have contaminated us," Velthas declared. "They have introduced chaos into our perfect order. We see it everywhere. Velthari meditating on feelings, Orgath greeting each other with meaningless questions, scientists making decisions based on sentiment rather than data. This is how civilizations fall." An Orgath commander named Caldrix nodded his mechanical head. "My analysis shows a 17% decrease in pure logical decision-making, across all concordant operations since the tribunal. Efficiency is dropping. Resources are being allocated based on emotional factors. If this continues, our entire system will collapse. We must act, Velta said. We must contain this infection before it destroys everything we have built. They formed what they called the Pure Logic Initiative. Their goal was simple: quarantine Earth, exile all humans from the Concordat, and purge any trace of emotional thinking from their society. They began gathering support, presenting data that showed the costs of emotional decision-making, the inefficiencies, the risks. Deho learned about the initiative through Kira. She had been attending their meetings, gathering information. When she came to his quarters on Nexus 7, her crystals were dim with what might have been worry. "They are building a case against you," she said. "They plan to present it to the Council within days, and Deho, they have support. Many species are frightened by these changes. They see emotion as a threat." Deho sat down heavily. "After everything we did, after proving that emotion and logic can work together. Some do not want them to work together," Kira said. "They want purity, perfection, order without chaos." That night, Deho called a meeting with his crew. They gathered in a small conference room, just the 12 of them who had flown into the nebula together. "The initiative is going to push for our exile," Deho said. "Maybe worse. They want to cut Earth off from the Concordat completely, and they might succeed." "So what do we do?" Jiwan asked. "I don't know," Deho admitted. "Part of me thinks we should accept it. We proved our point. We saved those lives. Maybe that's enough. If we fight this, we risk everything Earth has gained." "But if we don't fight," Taeyang said, "we're saying they're right. That emotion is dangerous. That we're a threat that needs to be contained." Subin spoke up. "I've been working in the medical centers. I've seen Velthari doctors learning to comfort their patients. I've seen Orgath nurses holding the hands of scared children. Small things, but they matter. If we leave, all of that stops. They'll go back to pure logic, and people will suffer for it." "But we're 12 humans," Hana said, "against an entire political movement backed by centuries of tradition. How do we fight that?" Minji, who had been quiet until now, said, "The same way we fought the nebula, the same way we rescued those colonists. We do what logic says is impossible." Deho looked around at his crew. They were tired. They had been fighting this battle for months. But there was still determination in their eyes, still that stubborn human refusal to give up. Before he could respond, the door opened. Standing there was Commander Ixtal. The Orgath entered without invitation, his mechanical form humming softly. "I have been observing," Ixtal said. "I have been conducting what I call efficiency experiments on emotional decision-making. I have data." He projected a hologram into the center of the room. Charts and graphs filled the air, showing concordant operations before and after the tribunal. "The Pure Logic Initiative is correct that pure logical decision-making has decreased by 17%, Ixtal said. But they have not examined the full picture. Overall efficiency has not dropped. It has increased by 12%. Mission success rates are up. Resource waste is down. And most significantly, satisfaction rates among Concordat citizens have increased by 38%. "How is that possible?" Deho asked. "Because emotion provides something logic cannot," Ixtal replied. "Motivation. When workers feel valued, they work harder. When patients feel cared for, they heal faster. When citizens believe their leaders, care about them as individuals rather than statistics, they contribute more to society. Emotion is not replacing logic, it is enhancing it." Ixtal turned to face Deho directly. "I have submitted this data to the Council. I have also submitted a proposal, the Dual Processing Protocol. All major concordant decisions will be evaluated through both logical analysis and emotional consideration. And I have nominated you, Captain Deho, to lead the Emotional Advisory Board." Deho stared at him. "You're supporting us? Why?" "Because 200 cycles ago I would have agreed with the Pure Logic Initiative," Ixtal said. "I would have called emotion a weakness. But I have observed what you have done. I have seen concordate citizens becoming something more than efficient. They are becoming engaged. They are finding purpose beyond optimization. And my analysis suggests this is good. This is evolution, not infection. He paused, then added something that might have been an Orgath attempt at emotion. Also, I find I prefer a galaxy where we try to save people rather than calculating whether they are worth saving. The crew was silent. Then Jiwan started laughing. Soon they all were, the tension breaking like a dam. They had an ally, a powerful one. Someone who could speak to the council in their own language of data and efficiency. So we fight, Deho said. We fight, his crew agreed. Outside, the pure logic initiative was gathering strength. But inside this room, something else was being born. A coalition of logic and emotion, of calculation and compassion. And Deho knew that the real battle was just beginning. The council chambers were more crowded than Deho had ever seen them. Representatives from every concordate world had gathered for what many were calling the most important session in their 3,000-cycle history. On one side sat the Pure Logic Initiative, led by High Arbiter Velthus. On the other sat Deho and his supporters, including Commander Ixtal and several of the rescued colonists. The debate had raged for 3 days. Velthus presented his case with perfect logic, showing how emotional thinking introduced chaos and inefficiency. Ixtal countered with data, proving that the combination of logic and emotion improved outcomes. Each side had valid points. Each side had evidence. Elder Vestara finally called for silence. This council must reach a decision. We have heard arguments for pure logic and for emotional integration. We must now vote on whether to adopt the dual processing protocol, or to return to our traditional methods and exile humanity from the Concordat. The vote was close, closer than anyone expected. In the end, the dual processing protocol passed by a single vote. Humanity would remain in the Concordat. Emotional advisors would be assigned to all major decisions. The galaxy would try something new. Velthus accepted defeat with cold grace, but his final words were ominous. You are inviting chaos into our perfect order. History will judge whether this was wisdom or folly. Deho felt relief, but it was short-lived, because that same day the warning came. The outer monitoring stations detected them first. Ships appearing at the edge of Concordat space, emerging from regions that no one had ever explored. They moved in perfect formation, millions of vessels in precise geometric patterns, and they broadcast a single message in every known language. We are the Nullwave Collective. You are imperfect. You will be optimized. The council convened an emergency session. Data flooded in from the monitoring stations. The Nullwave Collective was unlike anything they had encountered. They were pure logic taken to its ultimate extreme, a hive mind that had eliminated all individuality, all emotion, all inefficiency. They saw other civilizations as broken systems that needed fixing, and their method of fixing was assimilation. They converted entire populations into processing nodes, stripping away everything that made them individuals and integrating them into the collective consciousness. Commander Ixtal analyzed the initial data. They are advancing on 3 fronts. Current projections show they will reach our first colony worlds within 10 days. What are our defensive capabilities? Elder Vestara asked. Substantial. Our fleet is ready. Our defenses are optimized. Probability of successful resistance is 73%. It should have been reassuring. But Deho felt a chill run down his spine. What are their tactics? Ixtal displayed tactical information. Pure optimization. They calculate the most efficient attack vectors and execute them flawlessly. Their fleet coordination is perfect. They make no mistakes because they make no decisions. They simply execute the mathematically optimal strategy. Then we're in trouble, Deho said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Why? Velthus demanded. We have superior numbers and defensive positions. Because they think like you, Deho replied. They're pure logic, which means they can predict every move you'll make. Every defensive strategy, every counterattack, every tactical decision. They can calculate it all because you'll do exactly what the mathematics says you should do. Silence filled the chamber. Ixtal's systems hummed as he processed this. Analysis suggests Captain Deho is correct. If the enemy uses pure logical prediction, and we respond with pure logical tactics, they will anticipate our every move. Then what do you suggest? Elder Vestar asked. Deho stood up. You fight them the way we flew through the nebula. The way we rescued those colonists. You stop being predictable. You do things that make no mathematical sense. You use emotion. Velthas's crystals flared with anger. You would have us abandon all logic in our moment of greatest need? This is exactly the chaos I warned about. I'm not saying abandon logic, Deho argued. I'm saying supplement it. Use logic to understand the battlefield, but use emotion to make unexpected choices. Be creative, be bold. Be willing to try things that the numbers say won't work. The council debated for hours. Finally, with the null wave fleet approaching and time running out, they made a decision. They would try Deho's approach. Human advisors would be embedded throughout the Concordat fleet, and for the first time in their history, Concordat forces would be encouraged to trust their instincts. The first battle took place near the colony world of Pac 7. The Concordat fleet positioned itself in a defensive formation that was mathematically optimal. The Nullwave Collective arrived and immediately countered it. Every move the Concordat made, the Collective predicted and neutralized. Within 2 hours, the Concordat forces were being systematically dismantled. Then G1, who was advising the fleet commander, made a suggestion. Pull back our strongest ships and move them to this position. That makes no tactical sense, the commander protested. It weakens our defensive line. Exactly, G1 said. Do it. The Concordat commander hesitated, then followed the order. The Nullwave Collective, seeing the apparent mistake, moved to exploit the gap. But it was a trap. The ships that pulled back had been bait, drawing the Collective into a position where the Concordat's secondary fleet could strike from an unexpected angle. It was a strategy built on deception, on risk, on the kind of creative thinking that pure logic couldn't generate. And it worked. The Nullwave forces retreated, confused by tactics they couldn't predict. But they learned. They adapted. Each battle became harder. The Nullwave Collective began incorporating unpredictability into their calculations, trying to account for the emotional factor. The war raged for weeks. Deho's crew was split across different fronts, each bringing their unique perspective to the fight. Taeyang trained pilots to fly like he did, trusting their instincts and making split-second decisions that computers couldn't model. Hana helped engineers develop weapons that shouldn't work but did, cobbled together from parts and hope. Subin found herself on the medical ships, treating casualties from both sides. She made a disturbing discovery. When they captured null-wave drones, she found that they had once been individuals like any other species. But the Collective had stripped away everything that made them unique, leaving only the parts that served the hive mind's calculations. They're not evil, she told Deho during one of their rare communications. They're efficient, perfectly terribly efficient. They genuinely believe they're helping by eliminating all the messy, unpredictable parts of consciousness. Can they be saved? Deho asked. I don't know. Maybe. But first we have to stop them. The turning point came at the Battle of Nexus 7. The Nullwave Collective launched their largest assault yet, targeting the station as a symbol of the Concordat's hybrid approach. They sent a fleet of 10,000 ships, all coordinated by a central command node. The Concordat's defense fleet numbered only 3,000. By every calculation, the station would fall. Even with emotional tactics, the numbers were simply too overwhelming. Deho stood on the bridge of the Perseverance, watching the Nullwave fleet approach like a storm of metal and cold logic. We need to do something impossible, he said to his crew. Minji, who had been quietly analyzing the Nullwave communications, spoke up. I have an idea, but it's insane. Those are my favorite kind, Deho replied, Minji explained. The Nullwave Collective operated as a perfect hive mind, all coordinated through their central command node. That node calculated every tactical decision and distributed it to every ship simultaneously. It was efficient, it was optimized, and it was their greatest weakness. What if we could overload it? Minji said. Give it so many variables to calculate that it can't process them all? How, G1 asked. By making every ship in our fleet act independently. No coordination, no patterns. Everyone doing whatever they think is best, no matter how illogical. Thousands of ships all making emotional decisions at once. The command node will try to predict and counter each one, and with enough chaos, enough unpredictability, maybe it will overload. It was crazy. It violated every principle of fleet coordination. It guaranteed chaos and confusion in their own ranks. But it was also the most emotionally human idea Deho had ever heard. "Do it," he ordered. The message went out across the concorded fleet. All ships were to operate independently. Trust your instincts. Make your own decisions. Be unpredictable. The response was immediate and chaotic. Ships broke formation and scattered in every direction. Some charged straight at the enemy. Some retreated. Some flew in spirals. There was no pattern, no coordination, no logic to it at all. The null-wave command node tried to compensate. It calculated thousands of scenarios per second, trying to predict and counter each ship's movements. But emotion cannot be calculated. Every time it thought it had predicted a ship's next move, the pilot would change their mind, act on a whim, do something that made no sense. The command node's processing began to slow, then to stutter, then to fail. And when it failed, the 10,000 null-wave ships lost coordination. They still fought, but they were no longer a unified force. They were individual units acting on old orders, unable to adapt. The concorded fleet, despite their chaos, despite their lack of coordination, began to win. Because in all that chaos, there were moments of brilliance. Pilots who saw opportunities that computers never would have noticed. Crews who worked together in ways that emerged organically rather than through planning. It was messy and inefficient and absolutely devastating to an enemy that could only understand optimization. In the heart of the battle, Taeyang spotted the command node. It was a massive ship, larger than any other, pulsing with the computational power needed to coordinate the collective. He made a decision without consulting anyone, without running calculations, without even thinking about the odds. He aimed the Perseverance straight at it. "What are you doing?" Anna shouted from engineering. "Something stupid," Taeyang replied, pushing the engines past their safety limits. The null-wave defenses should have stopped him, but they were overloaded, distracted by thousands of other unpredictable threats. Taeyang flew through gaps that shouldn't have existed, made turns that defied physics and somehow, impossibly, reached the command node. Subin had prepared a weapon that wasn't a weapon at all. It was a virus she had developed from studying captured drones. Not a computer virus, an emotional virus, code designed to reactivate the suppressed consciousness of the collective's assimilated beings, to remind them of what they had been before optimization. Taeyang delivered it directly into the command node's core. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Throughout the null-wave fleet, drones began to wake up. They remembered who they had been. They felt emotions they had forgotten existed. Fear, hope, confusion, anger. And with those emotions came choice. The collective began to fragment. Some drones continued fighting. Some stopped. Some turned on each other. But the perfect unity was broken. The hive mind shattered into thousands of individual minds, all suddenly aware of their own existence. The battle ended not with a grand victory, but with confusion and chaos. The null-wave fleet retreated, no longer unified, no longer unstoppable. They didn't return to their own space. They simply scattered, thousands of ships fleeing in different directions, each newly freed individual seeking their own path. The Concordat had won, but it was a strange victory, one measured not in destroyed ships but in liberated minds. In the aftermath, the Concordat gathered to assess what had happened. The Pure Logic Initiative was silent. Even Vel'Thas had to admit that pure logic had been insufficient against the null-wave collective. Emotion had not just supplemented logic, it had saved them. Elder Vestera stood before the council. "We have learned something today. We have learned that perfection is not strength, that unpredictability is not weakness, that the messy, chaotic emotional aspects of consciousness are not flaws to be eliminated, but tools to be embraced." She turned to Deho. "You asked us once which was truly flawed, the logic that told us to abandon the innocent or the emotion that told us to save them. I believe we have our answer." The dual processing protocol became permanent. Emotional advisors were integrated into every level of concordant governance. Species that had evolved beyond emotion began the slow process of learning to feel again. It was awkward and difficult, but they persisted. Months later, Deho stood on the observation deck of Nexus 7. He watched as ships moved through the station's traffic patterns. Veltheri pilots flying with new confidence, Orgath engineers laughing as they worked together, former null-wave drones learning to be individuals again, helped by counselors who taught them that having feelings wasn't a weakness. Ji1 joined him at the window. We did it. We actually changed the galaxy. We showed them a possibility, Deho corrected. They're the ones doing the hard work of changing. Do you think it will last? Deho watched a group pass by the window, a human, a Velthari and an Orgath walking together and talking animatedly about something. The Velthari's crystals glowed with what might have been amusement. The Orgath's mechanical voice carried notes of what could be excitement. I think it will, Deho said, because they've learned something that we humans have always known. Logic shows you what's possible, but emotion shows you what's worth doing. Together they're unstoppable. The Perseverance launched from the station, heading out on a new mission. This time its crew was mixed. Humans worked alongside Velthari and Orgath, learning from each other, combining their strengths. The ship was scarred from the battles it had fought, but it flew true. Behind them, the Concordat continued its evolution, learning to balance calculation with compassion, efficiency with empathy, logic with love. They would face new challenges, make new mistakes, struggle with the chaos that emotion introduced, but they would face it together. And that Deho knew was the real victory, not defeating an enemy, but finding a way to be more than they were before. To be both logical and emotional. To be complete. The galaxy had called emotion a weakness, but humanity had proven it was the strongest weapon of all. Not because it destroyed enemies, but because it built bridges. Not because it solved problems, but because it made solving them worthwhile. The Concordat had learned that perfection was not the absence of emotion. It was the balance of all things. Logic and feeling, calculation and intuition, order and chaos, all working together toward a better future. And in that balance they found something that neither pure logic nor pure emotion could achieve alone. They found purpose. They found meaning. They found hope. The stars stretched out before them, infinite and full of possibility. And for the first time in 3,000 cycles, the Concordat looked at those stars not with cold calculation, but with wonder, with excitement, with emotion, and they knew they were ready for whatever came next.